Okay, this is the second part of the video that explains how to enter the steps of the purchase to pay process. So in the first part, what we did was we created the purchase order. So we skipped the purchase requisition step and went straight to this one. So we pretended that we work at the purchasing department and we want to create a PO to be sent to the vendor. So at the end of this process, the SAP creates a transaction and records transaction, and we have to record the transaction ID. Well, actually we don't have to record that because I'm going to show you how to find the transaction ID in the system if you don't remember it. So in this part of the video we're going to perform the rest of the steps. So next one for us is going to be to record the materials receipt. So we send the supplier the purchase order, and at that point the process is largely outside of our control. So we have to wait until the vendor will send the truck with the shipment, and it will show up at our warehouse. And when we unload the truck and place the goods on the shelves, we have to come to the computer and record the fact that we have received the shipment and increase the inventory. So I actually logged out of SAP after I recorded the first video, so I'm going to log back in. So I'll go ahead and double click the icon and then find GB5 in the list of the systems. That's the system that we're using. Right click, log on, and you will see this screen. Okay, so here I have to type the client. In our class it's 652, and then after that I believe my ID was AIS-027. You have different ID obviously, and then type your password. Okay, and then click on the green button, and now you're in the system. Alright, so first of all I'm going to show you how to find the invoice, not the invoice, purchase order that we entered before. So we go to the logistics menu. Because we're doing procurement, purchasing, it is located in materials management. So all things related to purchases are located in menu. Alright, then let's go to the purchasing menu, purchase order. In the previous video we used that link when we created the purchase order when the supplier was known. Now we just want to see the purchase order, so I'm going to try to find it. Display. Oh wow, there it is. Okay, so apparently the SAP remembers the last thing that I've done, and therefore it brings up the screen immediately. So it remembers that I created the purchase order with the number 45 and a bunch of zeros. That's a pretty useful ID to remember in this exercise, but I'll show you in the next step how to find the PO ID, purchase order ID, if I don't remember that. So let's go back. So this is the purchase order that I have created. And now, as we just discussed, we're on the second step. That would be the inventory receipt. So I'm done with purchasing. Now I go to the next one, material inventory management. So go ahead and expand the inventory management, and the very first option would be goods movement. I'm receiving inventory, so that's why I'm going into this menu, and that would be goods receipt. I'm receiving inventory from my vendor. For purchase order, because I'm receiving things not just because somebody kind sent it to me, but I ordered that from my vendor. GR, goods receipt for purchase order. Double click on that link and the screen will show up. Okay, so as I said, we're pretending that we're in the warehouse, and we just received boxes with goods. A reminder from the first part of the video, I believe we ordered 60 units of off-road helmets and 150 units of road helmets. So here I have to provide the SAP. The very first thing that I have to do is provide SAP with a PO number. Well, I remember that this is 4, 5, and a bunch of zeros, but I can look it up in the system. So F4 search, or just simply clicking that button, and this is the window that allows me to search by different options. Right now I'm looking for purchasing documents per vendor. That's the one that I'm going to use. But if you don't see that as your default search item, then you can just go to the upper right corner. Here is the full list of screens, your search options, and pick purchase documents per vendor. Okay, vendor. Oh god, I don't even remember the vendor. So what do? Well, I search the vendor first. So I'm gonna click that button. In search term, as I explained in the previous video, I'm gonna say star, which means any number of any characters, and my ID. You have to use your ID on that step. So mine is 0 to 7 that I'm using. Search, and it should give me the full list of my vendors. There it is. And note that they all end with the same number, 0 to 7. That is my ID in the system. So your vendors list, each one of them should end with your ID. So it's not 0 to 7, it's something else. Well, the purchase order came in from Olympic Protective Gear. I'm gonna select that, and that gives me the vendor ID. Now I have to go ahead and say, well, for this vendor, go ahead and find me all the purchase orders. And there it is. So this is the list of all documents. Well, I have only one. I created only one PO, so there it is. Created it on March 19th, 2020, and today is actually 3 days later. It's 4 days later, 23rd. And here is my ID, 45 and what's that? 8 zeros. Okay, so all I have to do really is double click, and the ID will be populated in the field. Now all I have to do is hit enter, and what happens at that point is the client, I'm looking at the client machine, right, at the client application right now, SAP GUI. The client application will send the request through the internet, and it will send the purchase order number to the server, and the server will return the data about that specific purchase order. And the data came back, as you can see. It says that this PO corresponds to the vendor Olympic Protective Gear, and on the PO I'm ordering 60 units of off-road helmet, 150 units of road helmet, and now I have to receive these units. Now you may actually see something different. You may see something like this. Okay. Now, why did I bring that up? Because what I have to do actually is to acknowledge the receipt of all these items, number one, and also specify slog stands for storage location. If you remember, we discussed in class, SAP has an idea of storage location that is an amount of space. It can be as big as the entire building, or an aisle dedicated to some material, or a shelf, or a bin on the shelf, where I'm storing certain type of materials. So this way I can actually track all materials in the system and know exactly where they are located in the warehouse. Okay, so I have to acknowledge the receipt of both of these items, and here I'm making a kind of silent assumption that all items that I ordered on my PO came in exactly these quantities, 60 units of one and 150 units of the other. Nothing is missing, nothing is damaged, they didn't mix anything, so the order came in exactly how I placed it. Now that may not necessarily be the case in actuality, right? For example, you may receive road helmets and 100 of them are okay, but 50 were smashed in transit. So you have to basically reject part of the shipment. You can still accept 100 good units, but send back for the replacement 50 others. But here we're assuming that everything is in good condition. So first thing, what do is I click OK, acknowledging that all 150 units were received. And in the storage location, I have to say where I'm placing them. So go ahead and click on that button, and you will see in this distribution center in Miami, I have 3 different storage locations for finished goods, for miscellaneous, whatever that is, and for trading goods. Now, if you remember, we discussed that in class. Helmets is something that I order from the outside, from the vendor. I don't perform any work on the helmets, so I just basically buy them, keep them in the storage, and if my customers, small bike shops, want to order them from me, then I'm just going to sell them, sell the helmets to the bike shops without doing any work on them. And that by definition is trading goods, right? Things that I buy from vendors, don't perform any processing, and sell them exactly the way how I buy them to my customers. I'm gonna store road helmets to trading goods section, okay? And now I have to acknowledge the same thing for the off-road helmets, but you can see that it's all grayed out, so I can't really do anything, right? I don't know if it's a bug or a feature of the SAP, but the reason why it's happening is exactly because of this portion at the bottom, okay? So if you have the same thing on your screen, you cannot click and acknowledge the receipt of part of your purchase order, all you have to do is minimize this bottom portion, so collapse it, close the data, and you will see, internet is slow today, and you will see that it will enable the second line. So I'm gonna say okay, and then same thing, right? Off-road helmets I'm placing in the trading goods section. So click on the search button, say trading goods, and that is it. So by doing that, I just acknowledged that I received 60 units and 150 units of both items, and when I post this transaction, click this button, that will immediately increase my on-hand inventory of both items by 60 and 150. Okay, so I'm gonna click on that button, and as you will see, it will clear out the screen. So basically it means that the transaction was recorded, and at the bottom in the lower left corner you can see that SAP has generated for me the ID for this transaction. If you remember, we discussed in class that all events are transactions. So when we place a purchase order, it's an event. When we receive goods, what we just did, it's also an event. It's recorded in a separate table in the system, obviously, so therefore it's generated different ID. So in your exercise that you're going to be doing, you have to record both IDs of the PO, or initial ID, in my case it was 45000, and this ID as well for the purchase order receipt, inventory receipt, and then I'm about to generate 2 more IDs, and they also have to be recorded. Okay. Alright, so I'm done with inventory receipt, so I'm going to go back to the main menu, alright, and collapse the good movement. So I'm done with this portion. So essentially, I'm just gonna show you the screen. What we just did, right here is my PowerPoint. We just played the role of somebody working in the warehouse. When inventory comes in, we place it physically on the shelves, and after that we record the receipt in the system. The next step is the company, that would be us, would have to wait for the invoice for this purchase order to come in from my vendor, and I have to do 2 things. First of all, I have to record the invoice in the system, and after that I have to send the payment on that invoice. Okay, so let's get to that step. Alright, I'm gonna go back to my screen. Alright, so how do I record the invoice? So I'm assuming that I work in accounting now, and I'm receiving the invoice. Now I have to record that in the system, and that is done through the next menu item, logistics invoice verification, document entry, enter invoice. Alright, so first of all I have to provide a few things before I get to the details of the invoice. I have to provide a few things about the invoice. Well, first of all, invoice date, when the invoice came in. So I'm assuming it's today. I'm going to enter the date. If I click again, if I click here on this button, then the calendar option comes in. And let's say that invoice was sent together with the goods. Okay, so my accounting received it today. So I pick the invoice date. Now the amount that should be on the invoice, obviously it should correspond to the amount on my original purchase order. Now if you remember, we ordered 60 units of off-road helmets, $25 each. That was for $1,500. Second item was road helmets, 150 units, also $25 each. That was for, I believe, $37.50. If you add them both together, the total for the entire purchase order was $52.50. So again, here I'm assuming that the invoice is precise. It's exactly what it was on my purchase order. So the amount is $52.50. I have to specify the currency, so I have to find USD somewhere here. USD. All right. In the tax, let's go ahead and select the option. Leave the tax blank, but select the option input tax. Right. And text is more like a narrative, so doesn't really affect anything, but I can leave the note that this is invoice number 01234. Obviously invoice, when it will come in to me, it will have some number, right? It would be internal number generated by my supplier. So for them it's the invoice ID. For me it's just a number that was on a piece of paper. It was generated by my vendor. Okay, but just to have the reference here, I'm just going to type what number they gave their own invoice. Okay, 0123 from Olympic Protective Gear. Right? That's the name of my supplier. Okay, good. Alright, so now that I did some general setup, I have to assign this invoice to the specific purchase order. And here I have to enter the purchase order ID. So if I remember correctly, it was 45000080, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, something like this. Okay, so that was my very first original document which I generated. And now when I hit enter, look what happens. The SAP client, this program, again sends the request to the server with this purchase order ID. When it comes to the server and gets the details are being sent again over the internet to me here, and it is displayed on the screen of my SAP GUI, the client application. So it says this purchase order corresponds to two things: 60 units of off-road helmet for $1,500 and 150 units of road helmet for $37.50. And over here you will see that the balance is 0. That means that this amount that I entered, that is on the invoice, minus the amount that should have been invoiced to me, they precisely cancel each other. So basically what they invoiced me is exactly what my purchase order quotes, and the difference is 0. So there is no unpaid balance, positive or negative. That means that you've done everything correctly. Okay, so and now all I have to do is really post that. Okay, so I just entered. Oh, one more step. Hold on. One more step. I have to acknowledge that this is these are the right things to be invoiced. All right, and after that I have to post. When I click the post button, it generates a different ID. Note that so far I have generated 3 different IDs. Original PO number, then when inventory came in, there was another thing. I don't remember the number, quite frankly, but it was related to the event inventory receipt. And now I received and acknowledged or recorded essentially the invoice. That's third event, and it generates also the ID, and this ID is also different from the previous two IDs. Obviously, they're all linked to each other because they're all related to the same purchase order. Okay, so I'm done with recording, and the screen is cleared, so that means that information was saved, and I can go back. So I'm back in the main menu, and that basically means that I am done with this step as well. Receive the invoice. And the last step that is left is send the payment on the invoice. Now note that both of these steps are done in accounting, right? Now, earlier in the semester we discussed that one of the important things in the accounting in general, and accounting information system specifically, it's the internal controls. The internal controls are policies and procedures that ensure that companies' assets are protected. Now, in other words, nobody's stealing inventory or money. Nobody is misinterpreting or misreporting anything material. So therefore, even though both of these steps are done in accounting, they are done by two different groups of people. So there are people who receive and record the invoices in the system, and there is another group that are responsible for sending the payments. So that is the internal control that calls separation or segregation of duties. The more people are involved, the less is the likelihood of fraud in the company. So anyhow, let's go back to the payment. Now that is done through the accounting, so therefore it's not actually in the logistics menu. Down there I see the accounting and financial accounting. Now since this is the money that I have to send out to my vendor, and it has to go to account payables. Alright, then I have to select document entry and outgoing payment. Alright, so I have to post the outgoing payment. Alright, so here again I have to provide the screen with certain amount of information. So let's say that I'm sending the payment today. So document date, that would be my payment date, again today. Alright, in this field I have to provide, so I'm sending the payment from my bank account. So here I'm assuming that my bank account is linked with the SAP system, and just go ahead and, so I have to provide what account number, what's my internal account number I have to use from my accounting system in order to send this payment. So general ledger, right here, right, list of chart of accounts, I have to look in general ledger, and I just search. I don't use my ID, as you noticed here, just click on the search button, and the very first thing, one with a bunch of zeros that will come up, is my bank account. Okay, so bank account. The amount that I'm sending is 5250, if I remember correctly. Here I can say text. Again, text is just any notes that you want to post. Payment on invoice, on purchase order number 45, if I remember correctly, 8 zeros. Okay, so this basically is related, this data is related to my internal accounting system. Alright, so now I have to post that payment against my account number for my vendor. So over here, and again I don't know who the vendor is, so I'm gonna find it. Well, I do remember, but yeah, let's say I don't. Okay, so search, general search for the vendor. Again, upper right corner is just a list of screens, different ways how you can search. So I'm just going to search by the vendor, and the search term, again, just like we always do, star means any number of any characters. 0 to 7, that would be my ID. You use your IDs on this screen, and when I start searching, it'll give me the list of all of my suppliers, and that's the Olympic protective gear. sending the payment to this fine gentleman. And when I hit enter button, the screen like this comes up. It says you're about to send to record the payment from your bank account in the amount of $52.50 dollars. So this is what I entered, the amount entered. The amount assigned, that means that the invoice that I'm referencing is for the amount, for exactly same amount. So all of these funds that I entered, they were assigned against the invoice that I had entered previously, and not assigned zero. So basically it means that these two amounts are matching, and that's what you want to see on this screen. Alright, so I'm going to click post button, and the screen clears up, and you will see yet another ID. Okay, so this is the payment ID that I have submitted and recorded in the SAP system. So therefore you can see that we have actually completed 4 steps, right? In these 2 videos, the first step was create PO, next one receive inventory, next one receive and record the invoice from the vendor, and the last one we just finished, submit the payment through the SAP system. Each one of the steps represents a separate transaction, so therefore they all received separate unique IDs assigned by SAP. So in the exercises that I'm going to assign to you, what you should do is each step that you complete, you should record the IDs of the transactions, and at the end of the exercise you have to copy paste all these IDs into the email and send them to me. I'll verify these IDs in the system, and if everything checks out, you'll receive full credit. So this completes the full purchase to pay cycle. And the next series of videos that I'm going to be posting will be related to actually sales orders. That's something that our customers buy from us, and therefore we play the role of the vendor and they play the role of the buyer. All right.